For more than a decade, I have been the biggest advocate for solo traveling, but I have to admit that for the last few years, I have had some company on my travels. This is my dog Gigi, who I love to bring everywhere. She is the best travel buddy, and to date, we've taken over 30 flights together on 7 different airlines, both domestically and internationally throughout Europe and the US. And before getting Gigi, I had trained and traveled with my family's other dogs, also for long haul flights. I know every situation is different, but having navigated the process on multiple occasions with multiple dogs in dozens of airports, I thought I would put together my best general advice for preparing for a flight with your dog. And I'm speaking from our personal experience about what has worked well for us. She is not a service dog, and she weighs 3 kilos, or about 6.5 pounds, so we only have experience traveling with her as a pet in cabin. But if you're watching this video and you're preparing for a flight where your dog will be traveling in the cargo, then you may still find a lot of these tips to be helpful. And hopefully they can make your experience a little easier and a little less stressful. So first, I want to share my most important piece of advice, which is to only use official sources when verifying any rules and regulations that you will need to follow. The only information you can trust when it comes to all the restrictions and conditions for traveling with a pet are from official airline websites and government and customs websites if you're traveling internationally. Blogs, Facebook groups, ChatGPT, Google AI overviews, and even YouTube videos, this one included, these are not official sources of information. Of course, you can go to these places for ideas and advice, but you still need to verify everything on your own from official sources. Because that is the only way you can support yourself if you run into any hiccups while you're traveling and when you need to be prepared with your documentation and your vaccination records and anything else you'll be asked to provide. I've also published the exact checklist that I used to my blog, which I'll link in the description below, of all the considerations I have to prepare for every time I travel with my pet, regardless of destination and regardless of airline. Because each destination and each airline will have their own rules and regulations, which may not be the same. But in every case, you will have to meet the conditions for both in order to travel. And in this video, I will go over my advice for choosing a flight and for booking the flight. And I will also share another video which will be all of my tips for preparing for the actual flight with your pet. So when it comes to choosing a flight, I try to find a route that is as direct as possible. And if there isn't a direct flight to my destination, then I try to find one that has a layover that is around 2.5 to 4 hours. This keeps the overall travel time to a minimum while still giving us enough of a buffer to not have to rush through the connecting airport. And it gives me and my dog time to relax and drink some water and to go to the bathroom. And something else I keep in mind when choosing a flight, if I'm traveling internationally, is that I try to avoid connecting in a third country. For example, if I'm flying from the US to France, I don't choose a flight that connects in Helsinki, Finland, because Finland has its own requirements for allowing pets to enter that may be different than France's entry requirements. So I find that it's best to just avoid any additional complications. Because even if you're able to board the first leg of your flight with your pet in cabin, any cancellations or delays may leave you stuck in the third country if you miss your connection. And you may potentially be unable to leave the airport until you're rebooked. So in that case, my advice, if you're not able to avoid a layover in a third country, is to be prepared for all the requirements for that country in addition to your destination, or for any country that you may potentially be rerouted through if you have to make any changes to your flight itinerary. So once you've chosen your flight, next, you want to verify that the airline accepts pets in the cabin for your specific route, because not every route will allow pets in the cabin, even if the airline is typically pet-friendly. Just to give one example, Air France is typically a pet-friendly airline that we have flown with many times, but you can't fly on Air France with a pet in cabin to the UK because UK customs restricts it. So when it comes to your specific route you'll be traveling, once you verify that the airline allows pets in the cabin for that route, the next step is to book it. I always suggest booking your flight directly with the airline and to avoid using third-party booking platforms like Expedia or Kayak or Booking. Because if you need to make changes or updates to your reservation, it's much easier to deal with the airline directly instead of being told you need to reach out to another company's customer service. And if you book directly with the airline, all of their specific requirements will be made much more clearly on their website. And something else to consider is to be aware of code share flights, which is when a flight is sold by one airline, but it's actually operated by another airline. Because again, each airline has their own rules, regulations, fees, processes, etc. So usually whatever airline that is operating the flight will be the one whose requirements you'll have to follow, because it will be their employees who are running the check-in process and verifying the documents and managing the boarding process. And my advice is to review and verify all of the airline's pet and cabin requirements, as well as their procedure for confirming that your pet can be added to your itinerary, because the process can be different. Some airlines will allow you to add your pet to your itinerary while you're making the booking online, while other airlines will allow you to add your pet as an extra service on their website after you've already made your reservation. And other airlines will require you to make your booking first and then call to request to add your pet to your itinerary. And then in this specific case, I suggest calling to add your pet to your itinerary within 24 hours of making the booking. Because if the airline is not able to accommodate for any reason, let's say they already have confirmed the maximum amount of pets in cabin that they're allowed to have. If this happens and you're calling within 24 hours of booking your flight, you still have time to book a different flight. And when it comes to fees, each airline may also have their own process. Some airlines will require you to pay the fee online when confirming your pet, and others won't charge you the pet fee until you're checking in at the airport after all your pet's health and documents and weight are verified in person. And beyond that, each airline has their own fee structure in place that can sometimes even vary for domestic and international flights. I've seen everything from $50 to $200 or €200 for a pet and cabin fee for each one-way trip. So, in addition to being prepared for that fee, you should also potentially be prepared to pay for additional check-in baggage, because in most cases, a pet and cabin will count as your personal item when you fly. And because of this, you will likely have to check your regular baggage, which usually comes at an additional cost on top of the pet fee. For some airlines, if you pay their pet and cabin fee, it will automatically include a check-in baggage on your itinerary. But that's not always the case, so it's just something to keep in mind and be prepared for. And also, if you stay to the end of this video, I will go over how I generally pack and how I tend to divide things across my suitcases and my carry-on and my purse and my pet carrier. It usually involves having an empty rolling carry-on to wheel through the airports. So stay tuned to the end and I'll explain why I do it that way to simplify the experience, because I have a few other tips to share before we get to that. So while we're still on the topic of pet fees, my next bit of advice is to book all legs of your flight under a single ticket. Because if you're booked for multiple legs of a flight under separate tickets, they may charge you repeatedly for the pet fee. For example, if you have to book separate tickets because your connection is on a separate airline, then each airline may charge their own pet fee. And again, they may also have different restrictions or procedures that you will need to take into account. Or another example is if you're booking separate legs of your flight because you're redeeming miles or for whatever reason. Just be aware that if you're booked on separate tickets to eventually arrive at your destination, the airline may charge you the pet fee for each flight. So try to avoid that if you can. And also, just to share an experience that happened to us once due to a delay. We were flying from France to California on Delta with a layover in Seattle, and our first flight from France to Seattle was pretty delayed. And while we were in the air, I got a notification in the Delta app that we were not going to make our original connection, and that they were already rebooking us on another flight to California, but it was going to be on Alaska Airlines. So when we landed in Seattle, when I brought my luggage to be rechecked at the rebooking desk, the agents were having a conversation amongst themselves that I could hear. And they were wondering if they were supposed to charge me Alaska's pet fee for this connecting flight, in addition to the fee that I already paid for Delta. And I chimed in and suggested, respectfully, that it should be Delta's responsibility to cover that because they rebooked me. And luckily for me, they agreed and didn't charge me. But it was a situation where there was not a lot of clarity on my end or on their end, and that maybe I was just lucky. And I don't know if I could expect the same outcome if it were to happen again. So in this situation, I would just say to be prepared to pay the fee because that's what they may enforce in the future. So those are all my best tips for how to choose and book a flight for you and your pet. And now I can go over how I arrange my suitcases and bags when I'm flying with my dog, who is my personal item on the plane. So I have my large suitcase that I check in, and then I have my dog in her carrier, and then I have my smaller carry-on size luggage. And inside that is my travel tote, which has the things I need to access while I'm in the airport and on the plane, like my computer and my wallet and my travel documents and all my snacks and my dog's food and treats. So while my travel tote is out, my carry-on luggage is essentially empty. But for me, it's important to have it because I can put my dog's carrier on top and roll her through the airport instead of carrying her. Because even though she's only 3 kilos, it starts to feel really heavy on a long travel day. And then when we're checking in and boarding, I can put my travel tote back inside the rolling carry-on suitcase. So everything is consolidated, and the crew is happy because I don't have too many bags. And my shoulders are happy because I can roll the suitcase around comfortably. And my dog is happy because we're together. And I've just found that doing it this way makes the experience more streamlined and less stressful. So I will link all the suitcases and carrier we use in the description below. And of course, if you have any questions about anything I've mentioned in this video, then please leave a comment below. I am always happy to connect. And I hope that this video has been helpful. If so, then save it, send it to someone, and don't forget to subscribe. And definitely stay tuned for part 2 of this video where I share all of my advice for preparing for the flight itself. So stick around and I will see you there.